Thank you all for being here today. I am not Michelle DeStefano, and she extends her apologies for not being here today. And I'm also not Professor Wilkins, who also extends his regrets for not being here. But he's in a wonderful place today. He's in Cuba with the president. So I'm your substitute, and welcome to the Center on the Legal Profession lecture series. And today we have a member of our family who we're all very happy to see. I often only see him on Skype. But he's a big part of our research at the Center on the Legal Profession. His name is Sida Liu, and he is an assistant professor of sociology and law at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and faculty fellow at the American Bar Foundation. He received his LLB degree from Peking University Law School and his PhD in sociology from the University of Chicago. Professor Liu has conducted extensive empirical research on China's legal reform and legal profession and published many articles in leading law and social science journals in both English and Chinese. He has also written on sociological theory and general social theory. Professor Liu is the author of 2 books in Chinese, The Lost Polis, Transformation of the Legal Profession in Contemporary China, published under Peking University Press 2008, The Logic of Fragmentation, an Ecological Analysis of Chinese Legal Services Market, Shanghai Joint Publishing Company in 2011. His first English book with Terence C. Halliday, Criminal Defense in China, The Politics of Lawyers at Work, will be published by Cambridge University Press in 2016. Please extend a warm welcome to our friend and member of the CLP family, Professor Sida Liu.
Thank you. Thank you, Derek, for the very nice introduction, and thank you all for coming. It's my great pleasure to be back to Cambridge. As Derek said, I've been involved in the GLEE project of Harvard Law School for almost 5 years now, so I'm really a familiar face here. For those of you who don't know what GLEE is, GLEE stands for not the TV series, but Globalization, Lawyers, and Emerging Economies. So Professor David Wilkins probably have already mentioned this term many, many times in this room and in this building. So what I'm presenting today is part of the GLEE project. Is a paper I've been working on with my colleague in China, Professor Wu Hongqi at China University of Political Science and Law, about what we call the ecology of law firm growth in China. It's really about how some corporate law firms in China get really big in the past decade and why that happened. So I want to start the talk by giving you 3 examples. To give you a sense of what I'm talking about. So the first law firm I want to talk about is this law firm called King & Wood. Now it's called King & Wood Madison. For those of you who actually practice law or have law degree in China, you've probably heard of this many times. It's a very famous law firm. Now just to be clear, of course, there's no Mr. King or Mr. Wood. It's never been Mr. King or Mr. Wood. It's just their Chinese name, Jindu, sounds like King & Wood. So very early on, they decided we're going to call ourselves King & Wood in English. And that actually became important because this firm has always been one of the top law firms in China for the past 20 years. But in March 2012, it announced a merger with one of the largest firms in Australia, Madison Stephen Jakes. At that time, King & Wood has about 1,000 lawyers, and Madison's about 800 lawyers. So after they announced the merger, King & Wood Madison, this new firm, had 1,800 lawyers. All of a sudden, it surprised many people in the legal profession globally because it was the first time all of a sudden there's a law firm in China basically became one of these big law firms in the world. And a year and a half later, in November 2013, King & Wood Madison announced the second merger with a British law firm, S.J. Bervin. S.J. Bervin is now one of the Magic Circle law firm in Britain, but it's still one of the major law firms with more than 10 offices in the UK and Europe and the Middle East. So after the second merger with S.J. Bervin even gave up its name, basically joined the King & Wood Madison system. So after that, the King & Wood Madison has, at that time, had about 2,700 lawyers, now probably around 3,000 lawyers worldwide. But I want to point out that even after the 2 mergers, King & Wood Madison is still now the largest Chinese law firm. The largest Chinese law firm is this firm, Dacheng. This firm was, for a long time, predominantly a domestic law firm, but by 2015, every time I give this talk, I have to update the numbers. So the most recent, by 2015, this firm has more than 4,000 lawyers. and in about 42 domestic offices and 9 overseas offices. So that's actually the largest law firm in China. Even after the 2 mergers, Ting & Wood was not as big as this one. And then, as some of you might have heard, last year in January 2015, Dacheng, the Chinese law firm, also announced a merger with Dentons, which is also a very aggressively expanding international law firm, originally from Canada, UK, and the US. So now the combination Dacheng-Dentons, you can see the map, pretty much covered most part of the world, except for Australia, Africa, and Latin America, but they're still expanding. I think after this merger, Dentons continue to expand other firms in Singapore and in many other places. So now this law firm is literally the largest law firm in the world by headcount. It has more than 7,000 lawyers. You can't count how many offices they have, probably 60 or 70 offices across the world. So this is the second example. But also I want to point out, even Dacheng, this law firm, 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, 2002, when I first started to study Chinese lawyers, Dacheng had less than 100 lawyers. And then it grew into 4,000 in 10 to 15 years. But that's still now the fastest growing large law firm in China. The most fast growing law firm in China is this firm called Yingke. As recent as 2007, 2008, Yingke, this firm, only had 30 lawyers in a single office in Beijing, the capital. And now this firm had more than 3,000 lawyers, 30 offices, more than 30, I think 31, 32 offices in China. And they claim they have 30 offices abroad, overseas. But notice I said they claim because there's some problem with those overseas offices I'll mention later in the talk. So this is basically what I'm talking about. In the past decade, from the early 2000s to the early 20, basically the past few years, some of the Chinese law firms became really big law firms. And so the project we've been doing is really try to explain why and how have some of these large law firms grow into these mega firms, join the league of big law in the world with global presence in less than a decade. It's a really short time. It never happened in the global history of the legal profession so fast. It took American law firms at least 3 or 4 decades to get there from where they were in the 1970s to where they are today. So of course, to explain this, we first look at all the existing theories about law firm growth. There are many theories. I don't have time to go through all these theories listed here, but basically there's one common feature of all these theories about law firm growth, mostly written by legal scholars, which is that almost all of them try to explain why law firms got bigger by looking at what's going on inside of one single law firm. Just to give an example, for example, my senior colleagues at Wisconsin, Mark Lanter and Tom Pillay, they wrote this very famous book called The Tournament of Lawyers in 1990-1991. They basically argue that there's an internal growth engine to the law firms, which is the Cravath system. It's the system of partnership promotion. If you follow the Cravath system, by definition, as they argue in the book, law firm is going to grow exponentially. So there's an exponential path of growth just because of the way these firms are structured internally. But if you think about it, you try to apply this tournament of lawyer model to the Chinese case, it doesn't work. Why? Because no matter how functional, how great the Cravath system, the exponential growth is, you don't get from 30 to 3,000 or 100 to 4,000 in 10 years. It just doesn't make any sense, right? So clearly something else is going on. So then we look at the broader theory about in organizational analysis, and there are actually some theories in organizational analysis, for example, new institutionalism, population ecology, or a very famous theory of competitive strategy developed by Michael Porter, one of the HBS professors here. All of them try to look at not just what's going on in a single firm, but actually try to look at what's going on between different firms. How firms interact and how firms coexist in what they call an organizational field. So we draw a lot of insights from this tradition, but our theory is a little different from all of them because we don't emphasize diffusion like new institutionalism. We don't emphasize, the birth, death, the selection, density optimization like in population ecology. We also don't emphasize the cost, the differentiation, or the focus of their strategies as in the competitive strategy theory. So what we developed in this paper is really what we call ecological theory of law firm growth. So we draw our theoretical insight from the Chicago School of Sociology, because this is not a sociology audience. I don't want to go into details. So let me just put it this way. We're trying to imagine the legal services market, especially the corporate legal market, not as just a market, but almost like an ecological system, like a rainforest. You walk into the rainforest, you see different species of law firms. Some species are like different kind of animals, or plants. They coexist in the ecological system, and they grow up and they interact. They compete for turf. They exchange resources. They do a lot of different kind of interaction. So it is by these kind of interactions they actually become what they are and where they are and how big they are. So the basic argument we have is that these law firms exist in this ecological system, and they compete for many things. They compete, of course, for business, and they compete for lawyers, for talents too. But they also compete for many symbolic things. For example, size. Which law firm is the largest law firm in the world, or the largest law firm in China? And the number of offices. Which law firm has the largest number of offices? And also overseas offices. Which law firm has actually more offices abroad? Right? So all those symbolic things are also part of their interaction, their competition. And also, our central argument is that how law firms develop, how law firms actually interact with each other is really based on their ecological positions. In other words, where they are in this ecological system and how they interact based on where they are. So in other words, we emphasize both positions and processes. Positions is how they're located in the ecology, and processes are how they interact with one another. So this is a basic kind of framework we're using here. Our time is limited, so I don't want to go through all these things. But basically, we categorize all the Chinese corporate law firms into 4 categories, 4 species. Global generalists, elite boutiques, local coalitions, and space rentals. And then we identified 6 different social processes by which they interact with one another: competition, symbiosis, assimilation, purification, accommodation, and proletarianization. So for the sake of time, I won't define them. It can take me 10 to 15 minutes to define them here. But again, this is not a sociology audience, so I'm not going to do that. But as we go through the empirical stories, I'll illustrate what I mean by these 4 species and the 6 types of interactions. So very quickly on data methods. So this is an empirical study. So we did interviews in China. My collaborator, Professor Hongqi Wu from CUPL, and myself from 2010 to 2013. So we interviewed altogether 39 lawyers in 12 different law firms, including 32 partners and 7 associates. And we also interviewed 4 bar association leaders and 1 very senior official in the Ministry of Justice, which is in charge of the office that regulates the entire legal profession in China. And our sites are 4 sites. The vast majority of our interviews were done in Beijing and Shanghai. Of course, these are the 2 cities where most of these law firms are headquartered or have a major presence. But we also interviewed lawyers in one of their branch offices in Xiamen. That's where my collaborator used to teach in Xiamen University. So we did interviews in Xiamen. And also in the summer of 2013, I was in New York, so I interviewed some lawyers in their New York offices of these Chinese law firms. So altogether, we also draw on some interviews from our previous project and some, of course, data from law firm websites and other data collections. So that's basically the empirical part of the study. But we draw most of our data from interviews, and I will also show you some interview quotes within the limit of time. So now let me first just give a quick sense of how fast and how recent these firms grow. So this figure shows the number, not the number of lawyers, because you can never count the precise number of lawyers of these law firms. They keep changing every day. So instead, we count the number of domestic offices. This is just about within China, how they grow. Domestic offices from the very beginning, 1989, when the first Chinese corporate law firm Junhe was created. And you can see the vast majority of them were created in the early 1990s, and then except for 1 or 2 was a bit later. But the growth really happened in 2 periods. First, in the mid-2000s, they started to dramatically grow. And then in the latter period, in the past 5 years, there are 2 or 3 law firms really started to grow really, really fast in terms of the number of offices across China. And some of the early leaders in growth, like Junhe, for example, was actually not the largest now. I mean, they were the biggest law firm in China in terms of offices for a while, and then it still remain only 7 offices. But some of the others, like Dacheng and Yingke, now there are 40 or almost 30 offices. So now let me go into the empirical data to give you a sense of what are the 4 species and what are the 6 types of social processes I was talking about. So I want to start with King & Wood, this firm that first got a lot of attention internationally. So King & Wood was founded in 1993. That was one of the first generation of corporate law firms in China. And by 2000, it was already highly regarded inside China. Most people regard King & Wood, Junhe as the top 2 corporate law firm in China in that period. Even today, I think many people still think they're really at the top of the elite corporate bar. King & Wood was also the first large Chinese law firm that adopted a lockstep system, basically a system of compensation based on seniority among Chinese law firms. They adopted quite early on in the firm. So you can see the whole story of King & Wood is really about how to make themselves similar to the Western firms, about convergence. They try to really model themselves after the large Anglo-American firms. So when the King & Wood got bigger, now they got really big, but there are 2 steps of their expansion, first domestic and then international. So if you look at the domestic expansion, that's what we call assimilation. Why we call it assimilation? Because King & Wood only expand their domestic offices by business needs. They don't try to plan an office in every province in China. Some of their offices are quite close to each other. Like, for example, they have an office in Shanghai, office in Suzhou, office in Hangzhou. The 3 cities are very close. But just because the 3 places are all very developed and they have a lot of business opportunities, they have set up offices in all the places. They really expand by client demands and business needs. And when they expand, for example, when they try to set up a new office in a new city, the way they do it is this is where the assimilation comes in. In the early years, at least, in the mid-2000s, when they first tried to expand from Beijing to all these other major cities, every time they set up a new office, they won't just merge with a local law firm. Instead, they will send one of their partners to the firm, to there, and set up the office, and then recruit some of the best lawyers in that city. For example, when King & Wood first entered Shanghai in the mid-2000s, around 2005, 2006, they basically got, they sent people there, and then they got 1/3 of the lawyers from Tongli, another major Shanghai law firm, and then they lost 1/3 of their lawyers to King & Wood. But then what happened is very interesting. So once they have new lawyers coming in to the new office, they won't let the new lawyers stay there. They will ask the partners, the senior partner who recently joined the law firm, using a term they call take a bath, 洗澡 in Chinese. The idea is that they will rotate you to one of their more mature offices in Beijing or headquarters or in some other offices, let you work there for 3 months or 6 months, just to fully expose you to the way King & Wood does things. Because every firm has a different culture, so they want to really help these new partners take a bath to become King & Wood partners, and then they will send them back. I don't think they're doing it anymore because now they're so big, it's virtually impossible to do that anymore. But in the early years of the expansion, they actually do this very clearly. And one of our interviewees from King & Wood said, for every office, we request uniform logo, uniform management, and uniform personnel, financial and administrative rules. So they want the entire King & Wood system to look the same. That's what we mean by assimilation. It's like you have immigrants coming into a country, you try to assimilate them. It's the same process. You have new lawyers coming to the firm, you assimilate them. But their global expansion is a little different. They didn't really try to assimilate Madison's, the Australian firm, into King & Wood. And also, a lot of people have misunderstanding about the King & Wood Madison's merger. A lot of people think, this is just one of the Chinese law firms getting big and getting ambitious. They're looking for market opportunity, looking for profit. That's why they merged with Madison. But when we interview the King & Wood partners, they actually say something different. Here's one quote from one of the partners of King & Wood. It goes like this. We often say that third-tier firms talk about case sources. Second-tier firms talk about management. And first-tier firms talk about culture. Of course, they see themselves as first-tier firms in China. From the very beginning of our firm, we have always been learning from the Western firms. But we always felt that something was missing. We feel that the most effective way is to merge with them. Of course, British or American firms would not work because they're too strong. They will eat us up in a merger. The biggest benefit of the merger with Madison's is not economic profit, but reputation, management, and culture. In other words, when they merge with Madison's, they're not really, I mean, because it's they use a structure called the Swiss Varan structure. This is a structure very commonly used in a lot of global law firms and accounting firms. So, for example, both Deloitte and KPMG used to use the Swiss Varan structure. And now Baker McKenzie, DLA, Piper, there's still a few large international law firms use this structure. So Swiss Varan basically is about two law firms merging, but not really merging in the sense that they don't share profit. They share the brand, but each operate as a separate entity. They don't really share financial profit or share other things. So it's a very loose kind of merger. So the whole King & Wood Madison's merger uses Swiss Varan structure, which means that King & Wood actually doesn't really benefit from what Madison's makes in Australia or other places, or vice versa. Of course, they share the brand. The brand sharing, of course, benefits both sides. But more importantly for them is really this opportunity to learn from this Australian firm, was 180 years old. It's a really old Australian firm, to learn the management experiences, how to manage a law firm in the kind of traditional classic Anglo-American way. So you can see this is really what we call this symbiosis. They try to put themselves neck to neck to a Anglo-American law firm to try to learn from them, but without actually further integrating between the two firms. And after the merger happened, if you follow the news, recently they've been running into some problems, I think, especially in Europe. I think a lot of some of the S.J. Berman partners have been leaving King & Wood Madison. I'm still trying to figure out for what reason, but yes, please.
Do you know what he meant by they would eat us up, the American firms?
Yeah, they will. What they mean is that they're really big. So if King & Wood merged with, for example, Baker McKenzie or Clifford Chance, King & Wood won't be King & Wood anymore. So they want to be in control, in other words. I actually chatted with David Wilkins about this when the merger first happened 3 years ago. David said, just wait, it's going to be King & Wood, Madison's, and the names that get longer, but it'll always be King & Wood. Maybe they'll even get rid of Madison's at some point, because they are really in control. It's very clear. One indicator of this is that just think about why it's called King & Wood Madison's. Because at the time of the merger, the Madison partners said, why don't we just call ourselves King Wood Madison, right? Like everybody else does. But they said, no, we're King & Wood. We're not going to change. We're going to keep King & Wood and Madison. So they're really in control in this merger. And the Madison's firm, I think, for them, when they wanted to merge King & Wood, it was because after the financial crisis, they were in really financial trouble, like many Australian law firms, not just Australian law firms, many other law firms in the Western world. So that was about the King & Wood Madison merger. So that's what we call assimilation and symbiosis. That's how the so-called global generalists, firms like King & Wood or Junhe or Zhonglun, these very large generalist law firms in China, how they do things. And the next example is about Dacheng. This really now Dacheng Dentons, the largest law firm in the world. And this is the model what we call accommodation. It's not the same as assimilation. Because Dacheng, if you look at the history of the firm, it also founded around the same time as King & Wood, the first generation of corporate law firm. It was a pretty good law firm, has always been a pretty good law firm in China, but it was never really at the very top of the hierarchy in terms of the corporate bar. And especially by early 2000, Dacheng as a firm was in trouble because they have some differences among the senior partners. Some of the very senior partners actually left. So by 2002, 2003, Dacheng was less than 100 lawyers and probably 70, 80 lawyers and in a single office. So they were really, they feel like they were out of top 10 in terms of headcount, in terms of everything. So they were trying to really find a way to recover, to revive the law firm. And then some of their partners thought about an idea. When we interviewed them, they said, we should get bigger first, then get stronger. The idea is that, we're not considered one of the top law firms in China anymore. If we can't get stronger than you, we can at least get bigger than you, right? So they start this almost frenzy of expansion. They set up office in literally now every province. I give you a quote. When we interviewed them, they said, now we have set up offices in every province except for Tibet. Now they have an office in Tibet too. The main form of our expansion is to merge with local firms. There are two reasons. From our point of view, law is a very local occupation. Of course, we could just fly lawyers to the sites like other firms do. But when these lawyers arrived, they couldn't even find the door of the local government agencies. On the other hand, in this period, many local law firms also face a bottleneck problem. and they hope to bring their organization and income to the next level. If they were affiliated with a large law firm in Beijing, it could provide them a better platform for development. So there are demands from both sides. So in other words, they were taking advantage of a demand from a lot of provincial law firms. They were already one of the best law firms in their province or in their city. They want to get to the next level because from these provincial law firms' point of view, sometimes they lose their biggest clients to the Beijing, Shanghai law firm. Why? Because if their biggest client want to be listed in the stock market in Hong Kong or in Shanghai, they won't use the provincial firm. They would approach a Shanghai law firm or a Beijing law firm to handle the transaction. So over time, they will lose the business. But think about it, if you're just affiliated, you become affiliated with one of the Beijing law firm or one of the Shanghai law firm, you can keep the client, and still do the business. So there are a lot of demands there. So the way Dacheng does things, they set up offices by geography, not by business needs. Some of their offices make a lot more money than others, and they have offices in the western provinces, in all the less developed places. And also the whole process was strongly supported by the government and the Bar Association, because some of the Dacheng senior partners were classmates from the China University of Political Science and Law with some very senior Ministry of Justice officials and Bar Association leaders. So they get along very well. So there's a lot of government support supporting them to get bigger. So when they merge office, this is different from King & Wood. King & Wood set up office by itself and recruit individual partners into the office. When Dacheng does things, they go to a city, they just look around, which firms are the top 3 law firms in the city, and they talk to each of them, they pick one, they just bring it in, without actually sending their lawyers there. It's very, very easy. And of course, there are a lot of risks if you do that. I mean, a lot of people were skeptical about this model. We said, if you do that, how do you control the risk, right? If one of your, satellite offices in Kunming or in Chengdu, they really did something unethical or they increase a lot of liabilities for the firm, what's going to happen, right? So that's also exactly because of this. Dacheng actually became the first Chinese law firm became a limited liability partnership, LLP. It was allowed by the China's law and lawyers in 2008. In 2009, Dacheng became the LLP law firm to control the risk. And also, if you look at it closely, and we interviewed some of their partners in the branch offices, we realized that they have a different kind of structure for every office, almost a different office. They not only have a tier system for the partners, which is very common. Now there are 2-tier, 3-tier partnerships, are very common for large law firms. They even have a tier system for offices. They classify their offices by their profit, by their size, into different tiers. They use different rules to handle these offices. So the whole model was almost like a franchising model. So in other words, they just gave the Dacheng brand to all these provincial law firms. Let them use the brand and have a certain kind of free agreement with them. But they operate like their own law firms. We interviewed some Dacheng lawyers, not senior partners, junior partners, or senior associates in Beijing and Shanghai. They told us, when we go to a province to do a project, we won't even visit our office in that city. We just go directly to the site because we don't know anybody in that office. We don't collaborate. We don't work with them. It's just we share the brand, but we really operate as different law firms. So that's what we call accommodation. You can see this is in King & Wood, at least domestically, they're making effort to try to assimilate partners into the firm, maintain the quality of work, maintain the reputation of the firm. Dacheng even don't try to do that. They just have a very loose kind of a network of law firms, all under the same brand, and then called Dacheng, but they do very different things in different offices. And then what about the international merger? And how could a firm like this, no matter how big you get, it's a very different kind of model of management from the large Anglo-American firms. All of a sudden merge with Stanton, become the largest law firm in the world. And we also talk a little bit, most of our interviews happened before this merger, of course, but we also talked to some lawyers privately about this. So as I understand it, the Dacheng-Dantas merger is really, again, it's a Swiss Varan merger. So they don't really share profit or anything. They share the brand now. But not just they don't share profit, they don't even manage the firm in similar ways. In King & Wood, Madison, at least they try to have uniform, management, these kind of standards applied to both sides. For example, King & Wood, after merge with Madison, realized that some of their branch offices were not profitable enough, if you look at the Madison's offices, or the property proportion of the PPP was a lot higher than the King and Wood office. So they actually even closed down one or two less profitable offices. Dacheng never really tried to do that. They never worry about that. They just, they share the brand. It's really about brand sharing. It's still a symbiosis. They, form this symbiotic relationship with an international law firm. But it's almost, they kind of extended their accommodation model within China internationally. They try to do the same. We operate as under the same brand, but as different law firms. So that's the story of Dacheng, the second firm. But the most exciting one is actually the third one, the Yingke law firm, because this is almost like a miracle law firm. As I said, it grew from 30 lawyers in a single office. Nobody heard of this law firm, before 2007. And then now they're, if you check the most recent number, it's already more than 3,000 lawyers. And it grew to more than 2,000 in 5 years. And if you look at a lot of second-tier cities, King and Wood, Junhe, these top law firms wouldn't even bother to set up office. Yingke was there, in a lot of these places. And if you look at how the Yingke operate, it's also different from Dacheng. A lot of people think Dacheng and Yingke are similar. They're both kind of very aggressive, doing this expansion, but they're actually very different. Because the way Yingke does things is almost like, we call them space rentals. They're almost like renting space to lawyers. So for example, to give you an example, when Yingke first expanded to Shanghai, they went to Shanghai, they didn't recruit any lawyers. Dacheng go to a city and look for law firms, right? And then bring law firms into the system. Yingke went to a city, look for buildings. They first rented 2 floors in a very nice office tower in downtown Shanghai. And then they rented the entire 2 floor with no lawyers, just one person, one guy sent from their headquarters. And then they renovated the whole thing, make it very beautiful. And they started to have an open call for lawyers in Shanghai to join them. So whoever is willing to join them have office space. You give them a nice office space, they can join the firm. And then they have this commission fee-based system. A lot of Chinese law firms have commission fee-based system called 提成制. Basically, the idea is that if you're affiliated with a law firm, all the billings you make, you pay about 30% or 40%. Different firms have different fee structures to the law firm, and then you keep the rest. That's the system. So in the Yingke example, they push this even to the more extreme. They not only they would say, if you want to join us, we provide you office space, which is actually better than a lot of ordinary law firms in China. They don't even provide office space for every lawyer. And we provide a nice office space. You only pay 10%, or sometimes a fixed amount, like 50,000 yuan, and that's it. You don't pay any more than that. Whatever else you make, you keep it for yourself. Of course, that's very attractive for a lot of ordinary law practitioners outside of the elite corporate bar. So that's why you see the Yingke lawyers are generally younger, less experienced than lawyers in other firms. They don't recruit the best lawyers in Beijing and Shanghai, these big cities at least. But in some second-tier cities, this model is actually quite effective because people realize, these firms have a lot of money. They actually do have a lot of money. I think they got a lot of non-lawyer investors in the early years. They invest actually, that's why they can rent nice office spaces and in different places and then make it beautiful and then recruit these lawyers and with a very less profitable for the firm commission fee structure. But so when we interviewed some of the Yingke lawyers, we were really struck by what they said. Sometimes, for example, one of their managing partners in Shanghai. Another thing is most of their managing partners are extremely young, like in early 30s or even late 20s. They're not really managing partners. They're like office managers, but they're all qualified lawyers. But they're just their managed office. So one of their the managing partner in Shanghai said, while other firms manage business, we manage lawyers. Lawyers are our business. In other words, this is not a law firm. This is like a structure for a law firm, So they basically provide this structure. Any lawyers can join in, can actually take advantage of the system, and then they collect fees from lawyers. They almost like renting space to lawyers. But when we interviewed their kind of director of the law firm in the Beijing headquarters, he said something very interesting. He said, "We do not consider law a profession, but an industry. It needs integration, division of labor, resource sharing, and must be built into an industrial chain. A law firm should be a combination between expertise and capital. Now I often tell other partners in the firm, you must believe in the big shareholder, because the big shareholder would now break his own arm to cut your little finger. Our voting is based on shareholding, not headcount. This is a global trend. In England, now non-lawyers can already hold up to 25% of a law firm's share. The actual operation of Yingke is like a limited liability company. So he's not even trying to hide that we're not running a law firm, we're actually running a company. I gave this talk, a version of this talk at Cornell in the fall, and one person in the audience said, this is just like Uber. Think about it, there are actually certain similarities to it, right? You provide a platform, right? For lawyers to make money, and then you make a small percentage of money out of it. This is like, if you think about this, like the sharing economy thing, there's a certain aspect similar to it. But of course, the ambition of this firm director is far more than Uber, far more than a law firm. So this is so you don't have to read all the Chinese to understand what it means. Just look at this, the Yingke ecosystem. So this is the law firm. This is the lawyer academy. This is the immigration service. This is like capital service, coffee shop, Law Cloud, which is the online legal service, study abroad service, business school, all these things. I mean, these are not all in reality. This is their vision. But the idea is that we're not running a law firm. We're running a law firm as part of the ecosystem, trying to run all kinds of businesses. So this is the way Yingke does things. So if you think about it, this is a very radical model for the legal profession. Of course, it breaks down a lot of stereotypes or what we take for granted about law firms. But also, it has this effect, what we call proletarianization, which is, if you think about the relationship between the lawyer and the firm in this model, lawyers are not lawyers anymore. They're like workers. They become employees of this firm. That's actually explains why the vast majority of Yingke lawyers are actually younger and less experienced. Because if you're a very senior, very distinguished lawyer, you wouldn't join a firm like that. You don't control any equity, you don't make any decisions. It's like a contract worker. So in that sense, you're actually lowering the prestige and lowering the autonomy of the lawyers in the legal professions. That's why we call it proletarianization. But on the other hand, as a business model, this industrialization model, it actually works quite effectively. That's why they were able to just go to different cities and then recruit lawyers, and boom, Yingke become the largest or the second largest law firm by headcount, not by profit, in that city. But if you look at the profit, it's actually very low. The profit margin was extremely low. I think we interviewed a bar association leader in Shanghai who told us, if you look at, you can't really precisely calculate profit per partner for Chinese law firm because they there's no data like that available. But if you divide their gross revenue by the number of lawyers in the firm, you can divide revenue by lawyer. The revenue by lawyer in Yingke was only probably 5 to 10% of the revenue by lawyer of all the other big law firms. So the profit margin is extremely low, but nevertheless, they were able to expand really fast. And then what about their overseas offices? As I said, they claim they have more than 30 overseas offices. What happened is that most of these offices are not real offices. What happened is that they go to a country, especially if you look at the location of these offices, they're not all in New York or Hong Kong, these London global cities. They're in Istanbul, they're in Warsaw, they're in Mexico City, they're in all these places that not usual suspects of these global offices. And what happens is that if you go to there, you realize they don't really have an office. What happens is they just found a local law firm, convince the local law firm that China is a big market. You want to do business with China, and the way you do it is that we sign an agreement. So whatever our firm comes to your country to do business, you claim yourself to be our branch office in that country, and then whenever you do business in China, we're going to help you. It's some kind of arrangement. So that's why they claim to have 30 overseas offices. Almost none of them are real offices. But when we interview their partners, they actually argue that this is not. They know this, and they're not even trying to hide this fact. They said by setting up these so-called overseas offices, we're not really worried about overseas because the vast majority of their lawyers are not doing international cross-border transactions anyway. They said they use a very interesting term. They adapted a traditional Chinese term called "flowers bloom outside the wall and the scent is smelled inside the wall." 墙外开花，墙内香 in Chinese. The idea is that there's a tremendous symbolic value because when we try to recruit lawyers, we can tell them, look, you're joining Yingke, you're not just joining a local law firm, second-tier local law firm. We have all these overseas offices. You're joining an international law firm with an international brand. Especially this is very attractive for the lawyers in second-tier, third-tier Chinese cities, and even the lawyers in Beijing and Shanghai, those lawyers who couldn't break into the corporate bar. They were just ordinary practitioners, but this is actually a very attractive model for them. So in other words, their overseas offices, goes back to, it's more like a symbolic strategy. It's not really try to generate profit, but really try to become symbols to facilitate their growth inside China. So that's what we found very interesting about the income model. But then, of course, these are the three biggest law firms in China now, so some of the biggest law firms in the world now. But I also want to emphasize that not every Chinese law firm actually followed them. Some of them followed. I don't have time to read this quote, but this is a quote from Albright, which is the largest law firm in Shanghai, remain largest. But when we interviewed their partners, they really criticized the Dacheng and Yingke. They said they're like the barbarians, this barbarous growth. They grow like crazy. And after that, but then they admit that once that happened, they have to get bigger too, right? Because if don't, because Albright has been the largest law firm in Shanghai for decades, and now if you're not the largest anymore, that's a problem. So that's why it used to be that these Shanghai law firms, they're not like Beijing law firms. They don't expand all over the country. They stay in their area, in the Shanghai, broader Shanghai area. But in recent years, you see Albright start to set up office in Chengdu, in Xi'an, in these western cities, precisely for the same reason, because they have to get bigger. If they don't get bigger, they're not the biggest anymore. So you do see this ecological pressure generate some of what the organizational analysis called isomorphism, try to make firms look similar. But not every firm is following that. For example, Junhe, a very highly regarded, many people think the most prestigious law firm in China, never really expanded that much. They still only have 7 offices. But I also want to talk about the 4th species, what we call elite boutiques. These are also a very interesting group of law firms like Haiwen, Tongshang, Fangda, Hankun. These are relatively small law firms now. They're like 100 lawyers, 200 lawyers. But 10 years ago, when I first started to study the legal profession in the early 2000s, these are big law firms. Haiwen, Tongshang, these are like some of the biggest law firms. At that time, they have about 100 lawyers. 15 years later, they still have 100 lawyers. Maybe a slightly increase, but not a dramatic increase. So why they could actually resist the pressure of growth? Some other firms have to grow bigger, but they just didn't. And the reason is very simple, because these are the firms, they're not generalist law firms trying to do all kinds of corporate law. They specialize in a few things, like IPO, for example, venture capital, private equity. They're really the national leaders in these areas. And these areas tend to be highly specialized niche markets, because you don't need the general public to know how good you are. You only have to convince the investment banks, the investors, how good you are. So they maintain their lead in these areas without actually getting bigger. And so what happened to them is what we call purification and competition. So the purification is the interesting part. One interesting case is Haiwen. Haiwen is a highly regarded law firm in China, very prestigious, but very small. It's still about 100 lawyers, even now. And if you look at where their lawyers come from, traditionally, Haiwen's lawyers only come from 2 law schools. Beida, Peking University, my alma mater, and also 对外经贸, UIBE, is another law firm. They only recruit, all their partners are from these 2 law schools, and they recruit most of their lawyers from these two law schools. And they also have a very strict lockstep system by seniority now, even more strict than the King and Wood system. And when we interview them, they said, the reason we don't grow is that we don't need to. If we get bigger, we dilute our expertise. We want to keep our expertise and keep in a sense, keep the blue blood of the law firm, like Cravath, Swain and Moore, in a sense. Cravath never really grew out of New York, grew very big. Right? So it's really, we want to keep the elite status of the firm. And also the argument they make is that, look, we're in such a niche market, like the IPO market. There are probably only, in every kind of IPO, there are only 5 or 6 law firms who are competing for a project. If 2 of our competitors merge, it's actually good for us. We have 1 fewer competitor, right? We don't have to grow big and merge with others to stay competitive in this market. So that's why we call this purification. They purify themselves. This is the opposite of accommodation. Dacheng is like we try to just bring in whoever wants to join us, but this is like the opposite. We're trying to intentionally try to resist getting bigger and getting more generalist. But of course, there's one big problem of this model, which is the lack of adaptability. Because For example, after the 2008 financial crisis, or half a year, China basically suspended all the IPO. There's no IPO project. So if you're a niche law firm like that, then you're in trouble. Like last year, there was a period like that too. So I mean, a good thing about big generalist law firm is that you can, some of your department is going to make money, right? But if you keep the elite boutique model, then it's kind of more risky for fluctuating market conditions, of course. So that's pretty much about the project, and I can go through the conclusions, but I really want to leave more time for questions, so I'll stop here. Thank you very much. Questions, please.
Could you say a little bit more about the beginnings of these law firms? And so how did they begin? And what were they thinking when they began? So for example, the geographic location, they could have started from second-tier cities, or the fact that they actually started from Beijing, Shanghai. The time that they started, for example, we saw a quote that if they were starting 10 years later, then maybe they wouldn't be able to do what they're doing. So could you just say more about the beginnings of these firms and how that played out?
This is a great question, because timing is important. Because if you look at these law firms, most of them are headquartered in Beijing, not in Shanghai. For two reasons. One is that there's a cultural reason. Many people make a cultural argument and say the Shanghai law firm like staying small and boutique rather than going big. There's a kind of Shanghai business culture. But more importantly, I think, is because all the government ministries are in the capital, in Beijing, and all the largest state-owned enterprises in China are in the capital. So the Beijing law firm has a natural advantage in getting powerful clients and powerful allies in the government. That's also support from the government when they try to grow. That's why they had an advantage. And also, you can even argue the timing matters because firms like Yinghe, they were founded much later. Why they have to use the more radical strategies to grow? It's because all the high-end market is saturated. It's occupied by these Beijing law firms. When they started in the early 90s, they were very small, and there were very few lawyers have expertise on these corporate law. But they started the firm. At first, they were just trying to help international law firms doing business. Sometimes they just sign documents by international law firms, because up until today, if you're an international law firm, have an office in China, you can practice American law, you can practice Japanese law or British law, but you can't practice Chinese law theoretically. So, and you cannot employ Chinese lawyer, you cannot merge with Chinese law firm. So there's a kind of a barrier to the practice of international law firm. That actually provides a space for the Chinese law firm. Now these are all very big and very profitable law firm. But at the early years, in the beginning years, they were just simply being kind of almost like doing the paralegal job for the international law offices. That's how they got started. And gradually they start to recruit partners who couldn't make partners in international law firms. Back to the Chinese side, they give them partnership. They recruit a lot of expertise from that. And also they recruit lawyers from abroad, a lot of the overseas lawyers. Originally just lawyers with LLM degrees from the US, from the UK, but now mostly lawyers from JD degrees. The bar is getting higher and higher over time. So I think the turning point is by early 2000, after China joined the WTO, you start to see, I wrote about this in one of my earlier articles, you start to see a lot of international law firms rushing to China, try to set up offices. But that also gives these Chinese law firms opportunities. They were able to recruit a lot of lawyers back, become their partners, getting expertise. But also they realize that they're strong enough. Once they have these lawyers, they can compete with these international law firms. If you, American company want to do a FDI, foreign direct investment in China, they can offer the same quality of service at half the price. So gradually they started to get more and more business from international clients directly. And also the second turning point is the rise of the Chinese companies, especially in the past 10 years. From the mid-2000s to today, you can see more and more Chinese firms getting strong, getting profitable, now doing outbound investments. So that, of course, generated, just like American law firms, American companies, when they go invest in other places, they want to bring American lawyers with them. Japanese companies, use Japanese lawyers. Chinese companies want to use Chinese lawyers too. But so far, if you look at the overseas outbound investment market, it's still the majority of the work are done by international law firms, because now even King & Wood and Dacheng, they have all these overseas offices. They don't have enough experience, expertise in some of these transactions. But I think over time, you will probably see a trend of more and more Chinese clients use Chinese law firms. So that's actually give them, I think, the second boost in their growth. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, Judy.
So it's really interesting to think about these different structures and incentives to share work, which presumably is really directly tied to economic credit.
Mm-hmm.
So you have, I hear anecdotally from lawyers who work at King & Wood that one big problem is, say, there's some expertise in a Hong Kong office, but we keep the work for ourselves, because if we share it with Hong Kong, they get the money and we don't get the credit because they don't have enough economic integration to give them incentives. I was wondering, what incentive structure is there to share work in a, like, Yingke?
Yingke, yes.
Yingke, where, like, and that really flows also to why clients go to Yingke. Like, what is their target market? But looking at Yingke, when a client walks in the door thinking they're coming to Yingke, are clients sophisticated enough to say, I'm coming to Yingke, or am I coming to see a particular lawyer? If they're young and less experienced, I assume they're drawn in by the name, and then work is shared, and then what is the incentive to share so that you actually give better client service because you're matching lawyer expertise with the needs of client? In other words, is there a risk that some of the economic structures give an incentive to not give best service to clients?
That's a really interesting question, because if you think about these law firms, I think firms like Yingke and Dacheng are easier to understand because they don't really share that much business, even between lawyers in the same office. I mean, when we interviewed some of Dacheng's lawyers, they told us sometimes we even two lawyers in the same office compete for projects, for the same project. It just never happened in firms like King & Wood or Junhe, that kind of firms. So in that kind of model, it's actually easier. It's very individualistic, eat what you kill, that kind of economic model. So that's actually you can argue that it makes their management actually easier, because you don't have to worry about referrals, all these things. You worry more about controlling the risk. As long as there's no ethical problems leads to scandals, then that's good enough. But if you go to firms like King & Wood, that's getting more interesting. As you said, they do actually do a lot of sharing, I think, domestically, at least in the same office. I mean, if you look at Junhe, King & Wood, Zhonglun, these large generalist law firms, some of them, they don't even, if you were recruited as a new associate, it used to be that you were assigned to a given partner, you just work for that partner. But not anymore. I think many of them, there's a pool of associates, they actually share these associates, they share the work, they share refer business. Even different offices, the collaboration are quite common. But internationally, I think we still need time to observe, because the King & Wood Madison merger is only 3 years, less than 3 years now. Actually, exactly 3 years. Now it's March. So exactly 3 years ago, 4 years actually, they merged. But last time I asked was probably last year. Someone in Hong Kong, they told me, yes, the Hong Kong office is the only office they actually merged, because there used to be King & Wood has an office in Hong Kong, Madison's office in Hong Kong too. They actually merged. But even after the merger, the old King & Wood office and old Madison office, they're in the same building but in different floors, so they don't really work together. You see, so that's it will take a while. I think also it's as you said, it's the issue of to what extent the King & Wood partners want to share, with the Madison's partner. Maybe they just don't want to. They just want, we merged, we learn the experience from you, and we do our business. You do your own business. We don't want a further integration. So if you look at that global trend, a lot of Swiss Varan structure eventually leads to further integration. You do see that, like some of the accounting firms, Deloitte or KPMG, they used Swiss Varan for a while when they were expanding globally. But once they kind of set up the global map, they start to integrate. Now they give up the Swiss Varan structure. But for King & Wood, I think, because it's so new, I think it will take time for them to figure out what's the best way to do it. How much control do they want to exercise? Because it's also a matter of control. Do the Australian firm, for example, or the British firm want to be controlled? Want to actually have a sharing of profit, with the equity partners in King & Wood? Not necessarily, because they make more money, per partner.
Now, it probably doesn't rise to an ethical issue, but it's a real interesting issue that you're projecting yourself to the world as, we are a law firm, look, we have these rich branches, shared expertise, But if the internal economic structure really discourages the sharing of expertise,
Exactly.
then you have a tension between that face you're showing to the world.
Absolutely. I think that might be the reason. I'm just speculating. That might be the reason some of the old S.J. Berman partners actually chose to leave because they realized it's actually not working as they were hoping to be.
This
That
is
could
not
be
unique to Chinese firms.
Of course,
It
of course.
happens.
Yeah, it's a more general problem. And Lin?
Yeah, actually, my question sort of was similar to Judy's, just to say how I think that the ecological description and the theory that you developed is really good for the external things. I'd love to hear more information about the internal dynamics of each one of these models. And you just hinted at it somewhat in that in the answer here, but in particular, the economics of each one of these types of firms, how much is there sharing and how much not? You've mentioned it in some, like that there's not as much sharing, that they're more autonomous. But I noticed in the Dacheng, for example, you said there was hierarchical control.
Right.
They merged with the local firm. How did the profits, what was the economic structure or integration or decentralization or centralization for each one of these models? And I think I also want to know that about the organizational structure, like that there's not sharing of expertise, where there is, or like paths for one of them you mentioned had lockstep compensation, and there was this kind of hierarchy. But I didn't hear that in some of the others. Like, what happens with the Uber one? Do they just get in, they pay their commission, and then they go off and do whatever they want, whenever they want, and wherever they want? Or is somebody overseeing them to make sure they're like following a dinky plan?
This is a really great question. The economic structure is, we have some information on those, but it's incomplete. Why? Because if you ask them about the details, they will say, this is a commercial secret. We're not going to share with outside interviewers, for good reasons. But we do have some kind of an idea about how this works. Like the Dacheng hierarchy control model, I think they sign agreement individually with each provincial office. And then each agreement is different. It's really, they're hierarchical. They pay different percentage of their billings, or there's a certain amount of fees. They can't be specific to tell us what, but we clearly said there are different categories of offices they're doing things. But the organizational structure is really the more interesting ones. I talk a little bit about King and Wood, but the Dacheng and Yingke, the Dacheng is that they have this, I think, 3-tier partnership. There's a senior partner, basically equity partner level, and there are 2 junior ones. The senior equity partner level is very small. They're probably less than 20 in the entire firm. And the other 2 are the 2 partners they don't share the equity. They're basically using almost like a commission fee model. If you're, I think the idea, if I remember correctly, if you're a junior partner, every year you need to make 500,000 yuan turn in 500,000 yuan billings, and then you take a certain percentage of that billing to yourself and give the rest to the firm. So it's that kind of arrangement. And this mid-level tier partnership is just the percentage was higher, the billing requirement is higher. So that's how they divide. They basically use this applied to the entire firm. Then of course you don't see a lot of very senior partners in the provincial office, but they couldn't make so much money. So for the Yingke, it's a very strange model. They have, as I said, they don't vote by headcount, they vote by equity. So really, it's the headquarters controls everything. It's almost like a company. They have all kinds of committees, of equity, what they call them senior partners, equity partners. They give these names, but those people are not real partners. I think the firm was controlled by this one guy who's a kind of a business entrepreneur, and then he has some friends in the firm who he trusts, and then they run the firm together as a company. So that's how it works.
Professor Liu, we're running short on time.
Yes.
We want to thank you. Would everyone just please acknowledge?
Thank you all for coming.
Be around for a few more minutes.
Yeah, and
come up and ask questions.
other questions I would be happy to answer.
Be happy to answer.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.